Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the database guy, and what we're going to do today is our third video on setting up a project. The first ones we did was Python and Java. This one's going to be C++. We're going to do it in Visual Studio on Windows, and then we're going to do it on Linux and Mac. You're going to be surprised at how much easier it is on those platforms. That's okay. Well, maybe not so much Mac, but Linux for sure. And another example why Linux is such a better development environment. But anyway, with that said, let's get started on Windows. So as you see here, I have Visual Studio 2022 set up. I have tested this on Visual Studio 2019. It works just fine. Start this part over. So as you see, we have Visual Studio 2022 set up. This works just fine on Visual Studio 2019, done it many times. But let's go through the process, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can make this process a lot easier. You do it one time, then you create what we call a template, and then after you create the template, you then don't have to actually do everything that we're about to do every time you write a C++ or a C database application. Now, as I may have or may not have said, you can use C with this procedure. You just have to make a few changes, like there's no C out and things like that. But let's do it in C++. So I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to select C++ Windows Console, and I'm going to pick the second one, the console app, and I'm going to give it a name, MySQL CPP test. You can call it anything you want and just click create. All right, now we're going to get rid of all of this code that is automatically generated by Visual Studio, but we have a lot to do. So we've got to actually set up some settings. I'm going to go over here to my project, not the solution, but I'm going to go over here to my project. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say properties. And then from there, I'm going to go over to see, I'm going to expand. Actually, the first thing, oh my God, I always forget to do this. Don't forget to do this yourself. Make absolutely sure that you have release selected, and make sure that you have active x64 selected up here in this configuration area. I've done this before where I actually accidentally had debug selected and then nothing worked. I couldn't figure out what it was. Then I had to go through all this procedure again. Just make sure you select release. Now, what is the difference between release and debug? Debug has all kinds of debug characters in your executable, where release doesn't. And these drivers, the MySQL drivers for C++, are not debuggable drivers. Now, I have read that that's different, that's changed, but for this demonstration, let's just use release. If I get the debug drivers to work, then I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. I think the procedure is going to be almost identical, but maybe not. Maybe there might be a little bit of a difference. So just make sure it says release and active x64. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go to the C and C++ and I'm going to click General. And the first thing I want to do is I want to have additional include directories. Now these are going to be the include directories for the MySQL C++ connector. So I'm going to drop that down and click Edit. I'm going to click the plus folder, add a folder, and then I'm going to click the three dots. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this PC, my C drive, program files, and I'm going to scroll down MySQL, double click on the connector C++, in this case it's 8.1, double click on include, and then double click on JDBC, and then click select folder. I don't double click on CPP-Con, I just click on select folder. And that's how, so now any include file that you have that's MySQL specific, it'll be found when you build the program. So I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to click preprocessor, and this is pretty important. Under preprocessor definitions, I'm going to drop down and say edit. And on the very first little pane, I'm going to type the words static con CPP. That stands for static libraries console C++. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to come down here to code generation. I know this is crazy, and you need to make sure the runtime library is this multi-threaded DLL/MD. There's a lot of different options, or there's 4 different options here. You have to make sure it's that one. If you don't make it sure it's that one, it's just not going to build. It's actually, yeah, I think it's not going to build correctly. Okay, so I'm going to collapse C and C++. I'm going to expand linker, and under linker I'm going to click general, and now we have to say where is the actual dynamic link libraries for Windows that are used in the linker. I mean, how do we link all of the MySQL functions into our program? And what you do is you come down here to additional library directories, much like we did for include. You drop down edit. We're going to click on the plus folder. I'm going to click the 3-dot ellipse. I'm going to go to this PC, C drive, program files, scroll down to MySQL, connector, lib64, and I'm going to double click on VS14 and then just click select folder. Now it looked like it was blank in there, but there are a lot of things when you create a folder or add a folder, it's just going to show you folders or directories. So go ahead and press OK. Now one of the last things we have to do is go into input. So I'm going to go into input under additional dependencies. I'm going to drop down and click edit, and in here I'm going to type MySQL cpp con static lib. Now what that means is that it's going to link all of the MySQL libraries in with your application. So if your application is really small, it's actually going to be a pretty big executable because it's going to link all that other stuff in there. But as you're building your application, it will get larger. And this also makes it possible where you don't have to have dynamic link libraries installed on somebody else's computer. Everything is packaged. It is larger, but you know, hard drives are cheap these days. So I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to click apply. I just do that. I don't think you have to do it, but I'm going to click OK. After I click apply, I'm going to click OK. All right. So now I'm going to copy, and this is the exact same code on every operating system, the C++ code. I'm just going to copy this from my notes, and I'm going to select everything in my CPP file by pressing Control A, and then I'm going to press Control V, and that pastes everything. Now I'm going to save. Now it shows me I've got some problems. I'm not sure what that is, but let's see. I'm going to go ahead and build solution, and let's see if we got an error. Well, look at all these errors we have here. That's because I didn't drop down debug and change release. So we just modified the release. We just modified the release configuration, but we were trying to build it as debug, and we never updated that configuration. For those of you who don't like Eclipse, I'll bet you're wishing you're on Eclipse now. So this is kind of a pain in the neck. So I'm going to go up to build, and I'm going to rebuild the solution. And this is something relatively new. I haven't seen a lot of this in the past, but if you notice, it says previous IPDB not found, fall back to full compilation. This has something to do with Visual Studio. It has nothing to do with your application. It has to do with the debug symbols and stuff like that. But what I do is I come down here and I look, did it all succeed? And it all did succeed. Now this is also assuming that you have the sample database that I showed you how to install when you were setting up your Windows or you're setting up your environment. So I'm just going to go up here and say debug, start without debugging, and the program ran. You can see the employee number, you can see the last name and first name. Now let's look at the code. Now we're going to look at the code here in Windows, but the code is going to be identical in Linux and Mac. So let's take a look at what our code is doing. Well, we have our IOStream and IOManip, which are C++ libraries to allow you to print stuff to the screen, get user input from the keyboard, and also format your output. Then we have this MySQL connection.h and all of these drivers. Those are all include files necessary to actually run your program or to compile your program. I don't think we're using exception, but you're going to use it. So I always include all those things. If they're not used, it doesn't really do much to your computer. And then using namespace std, a lot of people don't like using that. I'm using it for educational purposes, just so you don't have to type in a lot of stds, colons. Without that, every time you do a cout, you have to do std cout. and same with endl. So we're just doing that. We're saying using namespace std just to make our coding a little bit simpler. Okay, so what else do we have here? Now we have some pointers that we create, and this is another good example of why you need to learn pointers. So we create an SQL pointer, which is a driver pointer called driver, a connection, statement, and results, a result set, and those are all things necessary to connect to the database. So the first thing you need to do is you need to actually get the driver instance. You need to get an instance of the actual MySQL database driver, and you need to put that address into the driver pointer. Then you need to connect to the database, and that's what this connection is. So it says driver connect. You specify a TCP/IP. We use localhost because that's on the local computer. If you wanted to connect to a remote computer, you would go ahead and just put in the remote URL. The :3306, that is the TCP/IP port number that you're going to be communicating on, and the MySQL server is listening on port 3306. Then we have our root user ID. If you have your own user ID that might have limited capabilities on the MySQL server, you put your ID there, and then you'd put the password in double quotes. Now, I don't recommend that you actually hard code your password in there. You might want to ask the user to type your password, and there's different ways of doing that. I'll probably show you that in this series of videos where you actually don't see the password as they type in, and it's just dots or asterisks or things like that. But since we're just testing here, that is the connection. Now what you do is you say that I want to connect to the database. Schema and database in MySQL basically mean the same thing. So I want to set the schema to the employees database. Then after I do that, I want to create a statement. This is the statement that we're going to have the SQL statement in that we're going to send the database server and say, hey, we want you to do something here. We want you to grab some data for us. And I'm expanding this so we can see that statement. And now I say, hey, statement, I want you to execute the query, select employee number, last name, first name from employees, and I wanted you to limit it to only 10, total 10 entries. I don't want to get any more than 10 rows out of it. Now I'm going to comment that, I'm going to leave that out. I'm going to take that out just so you can see how many employees are in this database table. And what happens is that execute query sends all of the results to the res variable, which is a result set pointer. So it's basically just kind of like a spreadsheet of all the different rows that were returned from the query. Now we have a while loop. In the while loop, the result set, the res next function, pulls the next row out of that result set, makes it available. We output the information from that result set. We get a string, which is the employee number column. We get a string, which is the last name column. And over here on the right, you're going to see the same thing for the first name. And we just print those to the screen. We don't do very much else with them. And then once the query is all done and we're done using the database, we delete the connection, and then we end the program. So that is exactly the same way it was in Python. That's exactly the same way it was in Java. But the syntax is a little bit different. So I'm just going to rebuild this, make sure I have 0 failed, and I'm going to debug, start without debugging, and you can see there's a lot of data out there. So I think there's like 10,000 or something employees, and since we're printing everyone, it's going to take a little while. So that's how you do it on Windows. Now, to do it as a command line argument on Windows is not simple. I don't think you need to do that for this set of videos. If you want to, I will make that available. I do have it in my notes, but you've got to set up all kinds of paths and it's a real pain in the neck on Windows. Okay, now I did promise to show you how to export this as a template, and so that's what we're going to do. Let's export that and then we'll move on. So to do that, I've got my project open. I'm going to go up to Project, Export Template. Make sure Project Template is selected, click Next. This is actually really easy. And I'm going to type in MySQL CPP template. Now I think you can name that anything you want, but that's the name. And you can see down here the name of the zip file that's going to be created along with the location. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. I'm going to click Finish, and that's it. And what it does is it pops up, and you notice it's under your Documents directory, Visual Studio 2022, underneath My Exported Templates. Now you can you can share that template to anybody and they actually need to put it in the same exact place. But let's go ahead and close that, and I'm going to say close solution on Visual Studio, and now I'm going to close Visual Studio, and let's restart Visual Studio and let's find that template to make it really, really easy. So I'm going to say create a new project. Now I'm going to select all languages, all platforms, and all project types. And if you notice right up here, there's my exported template. So I'm going to click on that, select next. I'm just going to give this, whoops, what just happened? So I'm going to select that, click next. Here we go. And I don't know why, yeah, I accidentally typed in there. So let me go ahead and close Visual Studio one more time. I don't know why the keyboard was set there. Alright, so create new project, but things like that happen all the time. Okay, there is my template. Next. Okay, so up here, I'm just going to give it a name, delete me, so I know to delete it, and create. Now, be aware that Visual Studio, even though that was a release project and template, it still comes up with debug. I'm going to double click on the CPP. So now I'm going to drop down the debug and select release. So now all of my IDE messages go away. I'm going to go ahead and build it. And we'll get the same warnings about, you know, what were those? The PDBs, I guess. Yes, the PDB files. But it says 0 failed. So if I debug, start without debugging, well, I said start debugging, and it went ahead and just printed everything. Now, why didn't it actually go to the debugger? Because this is a release, there's no debug symbols. Visual Studio saw that and it just started running it. So Control C and the program's done. And we get a kind of an error because there were no debug symbols. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw that away. Okay, so now let's move on to Linux. Okay, here we are on our Mint Linux. It works the same on Ubuntu. Let's go into our Documents folder. I actually have a CPP folder in here, and I actually have a Test MySQL folder. Let's see if that works for us. So I'm gonna double click on that. Okay, so this is the exact same code. This is the absolute exact same code that we had in the Windows version. I'm selecting everything. If I want to limit it by 10, I can do that. I can save it. Now I will put this build command into the video description, but I'm just going to copy that. And I didn't have to set up a project. I didn't have to do anything. I just created the file and I put my code in there. I'm going to minimize that. Now I'm going to right click on the background and I'm going to say open in terminal, and I'm just going to say paste, and that's that build command. Now I don't think it copied correctly. I think it left the G++ out of there. And I'm going to press enter. And oh, what just happened? I didn't put in the correct. Oh, yep, I didn't copy that incorrectly. So let me make sure I've got that command correct. Yep, I didn't type all that. I didn't copy it correctly. So CONN. And it worked. That's it. That's all you have to do for Linux. And I'm just going to say main, and it printed out the 10. Also, notice how fast it is. So I'm going to edit this one more time, and this time I'm going to get rid of that limit 10. So you can just see how fast it is on Linux. Let's build it. And just really, really fast. So the code is, yep, it's done already. It printed all of them. I don't even know how many there were, 10,000 or something like that. So really, really nice on Linux. The code's exactly the same. If you jumped to this section of the video to look how to do this on Linux, you might want to go back to the Windows video, take a look at that, because I explain all of the statements in the C++ program. And now I think we should move on to Mac. Okay, let's look at how we do this on an Apple Mac. Now, we can do it through Xcode, but oh my God, take my word for it, it is a nightmare. So what we're going to do is we're going to download a programmer's editor that we use on Linux called Genie. And I'm going to bring up the browser here and I'm going to type genie.org. And from there I'm going to download the Genie editor, and really a nice editor. It does code highlighting and everything. And I'm going to select, now if you're using AM and ARM, you want to select that, but I'm going to use the first one. And let me see if I clicked on that correctly. There we go. I'm going to allow downloads. Again, my mouse is a little bit off on this virtual machine. Okay, so let's go ahead and close our Safari. Let's get Genie installed. It's a pretty simple installation. I'm going to go to Downloads, double click on Genie DMG, and I'm just going to drag the Genie icon to the Applications folder, and that's pretty much it. Alright, then we're going to go ahead and close that. Close our downloads. You can delete that file if you want. I'm going to eject that. And now I'm going to go ahead and go to my Applications folder, which I put on my dock, and there's my Genie. Go ahead and bring that up. Now, this code on the Mac is going to be identical to what we did on Windows and Linux. So I'm just going to copy and paste it into there. So let me go to my notes here, and I'm going to copy and paste my simple little C++ program. Now, if you jumped to the Mac section, I'm not going to go through all of the code again. What you should do is you should take a look at the Windows and the Windows part of this video, and it'll tell you what all of those statements mean. I'll actually put a chapter link in the video for you. And now there's nothing highlighted here. The Genie editor looks pretty bad right now. So let's go ahead and we have to save it. So I'm going to click this little down arrow. It's going to say, where do I want to save it? Well, I'm going to go to Documents. And I'm going to create a folder. So I'm going to click the plus over here. And I'm going to call this CPP. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call it main.cpp. And click Save. Now once you give it the file extension, you can see all of the highlights and it'll help indenting and all that. Now, Genie is not an integrated development environment. If you go up to Build, it does have a compile option, but it's not going to compile it correctly because we don't have all the libraries included for it. So I believe you can set those up. Let's go ahead and expand this. Yeah, you see that you get some errors on the build. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it with a command line, and then let's see if we can modify Genie to include the libraries and all that. So let's go ahead and do this from the command line. Again, it's so much easier than on Xcode. So I'm going to bring up my applications. I'm going to drop down to Utilities, and I'm going to click on Terminal. Now, I put this in my Documents folder, so I'm going to change directory to Documents. I'm going to change directory to CPP, and ls will list in there what I've got, and there's my main.cpp file. So the command, and again, I will put this into the notes for this video, but this is the command to do the build, and I'm just going to press Enter, and boom, it's done. And I'm going to type /main, and there's my output. So I can always go through here, and I'm going to, instead of limit 10, I'm just going to get rid of the limit 10, save it, rebuild it, run it, and now it's going to print all 10,000 of those employees. So again, you can modify, you can set up the build command on Genie. I've had trouble doing that in the past. I haven't been able to get it to work yet. That doesn't mean I can't. I'm probably doing something, obviously I'm doing something wrong. But on using the command line, it's very, very simple. Using Genie, you can go ahead and do that. Open up a command line window, build it, test it as you're doing the code. On Xcode, if I got enough people asking me how do I set up Xcode, I can publish those instructions in the description, but oh my goodness, is that difficult. It is a real pain in the neck. Now, you can do the same thing with Xcode that you did with Visual Studio, is that once you set it up on the IDE, you can then make a copy of the project, create a zip file or a tar file, and then you can always use that and then rename it for every project that you want to do. It's not quite as attractive on Xcode as it is on Visual Studio. Now, Visual Studio Code, you can also do it, but the problem with that is that I've never tested it. I haven't gotten it to work. I've tried a little bit, to be fair. I haven't probably exhausted all my options yet. But the command line is so much easier. And if you do everything on Linux, you don't have any of these problems, and you can run Linux on both Windows and Mac, and you don't have to worry about this. And then when it comes time to move it over to the Mac native or Windows native, then you can deal with those problems at that time. So there you go. So there's our first C++ program from MySQL. Hope to see you in our next video.